The Kennedy Road Market. That morning, the sprawling parking lot of the Kennedy Road Market in Scarborough was already a hive of activity. The sound of vendors hawking their wares, kids darting between stalls, and the smell of hot dogs and exhaust fumes mingled with the damp air. Among the chaos, a woman in her early 20s pushed a wobbly shopping cart piled high with plastic bags full of bottles and cans. Her clothes were worn, her face smudged with grime and sweat, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. People knew her only as Rachel, the young bottle collector who was a familiar sight around the market. Few knew her routine. Rachel always arrived before dawn and left as the last vendors packed up. She rarely spoke, keeping her head down, just working. But behind that quiet exterior, there was something different in the way she watched people, in her methodical pace, and in the sharp, assessing gaze she had when she saw something suspicious. That day, the market's atmosphere was tense. Several vendors whispered about two patrol constables who often showed up, not to keep the peace, but to shake down the small-time operators. Yesterday, they hit Sam for $100, just because they said his fruit stand was blocking the aisle, muttered a man selling vintage clothes. It's just a small tarp on the ground, another added. Rachel heard it all, saying nothing. She continued sorting cans by the curb, but inside, something was starting to boil. She had already memorized their faces. Constable Davis and Constable Miller, notorious in the area for their arrogant swagger. The shakedown. Just before noon, the two officers arrived. Their marked cruiser parked right in the middle of the market's main artery, lights flashing as if they were conducting a major raid. The crowd went quiet. Some pretended to be busy, others simply moved away. "Hey, your stall is blocking traffic," Davis barked at a fruit vendor. "Sorry, sir. Just for a bit, I'll tidy it up," the vendor replied, his voice shaking. "Careful. You said that last time." "Look, if you want to stay safe here, you know the deal," Davis said, tapping the pocket of his vest. The signal was unmistakable. The vendor, his face a mask of resignation, discreetly slipped a few folded bills into his hand. Miller, Davis's partner, just laughed quietly, scanning the crowd. "It's just the cost of doing business, buddy. If you don't want the hassle, you just pay," he said, his gaze landing on Rachel, who was collecting bottles nearby. Their eyes met for a second. Miller smirked. "Well, look who it is. The bottle queen. What are you selling illegally, huh? This cart of yours looks like a garbage heap." He kicked the wheel of Rachel's cart. Rachel held her ground. "Sorry, officers. I'm just collecting empties," she said softly. "Collecting? This is public property. You're blocking the way. If you want to work here safely, you owe us a security fee," Davis chimed in, his tone dripping with condescension. A few people were watching, but no one dared to speak. They knew that crossing cops like Davis could lead to endless trouble. But today didn't go as planned. Rachel looked at them for a long moment. She didn't get angry, but a cold tension emanated from her. "I don't have any money, sir. But if you harass me again, I'll report you," she said, her voice firm. The air went still. Miller burst out laughing. "Report us? To who? Who do you think you are, huh? A binner with an attitude." Davis clapped Miller on the shoulder. "Come on, let her go. She'll probably be gone by tomorrow anyway." The two walked off, laughing dismissively, leaving Rachel to stare at their backs. But behind her calm, something in her expression had shifted. It wasn't the face of a vulnerable girl, but of someone calculating their next move. The operative. That night, Rachel sat in her small basement apartment. She flicked on a small lamp, opened an old duffel bag, and pulled out a high-end smartphone with a cracked screen. On it, she opened an encrypted messaging app, showing a conversation with someone labeled Commander A. "Commander A, target engaged." "Rachel, confirmed." 2 officers extorting vendors. Location, Kennedy Market. Commander A. Good. We need to catch them red-handed. But keep it low profile for now. Rachel, understood. Waiting for the right moment. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time before putting the phone away. She took a deep breath. Everything she had been doing, living undercover as a bottle collector, embedding herself in this working-class community, wasn't out of desperation. It was a mission. She was an undercover officer with a special internal affairs task force, assigned to investigate reports of corruption and extortion within the Toronto Police Service itself. For 3 months, she had lived this false identity, enduring the humiliation, pretending to be invisible. But tonight, she knew the assignment was nearing its end. She just needed one more moment. A moment when they were careless. The next morning, the market was busy again. But Rachel was no longer just collecting cans. Beneath her worn-out jacket, a miniature body camera was hidden, and a tiny earpiece connected her to her team, parked in an unmarked van a few blocks away. She knew they would be back. Sure enough, around 11 a.m., the sound of the cruiser returned. Constable Davis and Constable Miller arrived with the same style, sunglasses on, radiating arrogance. They stopped right in front of the same fruit vendor they'd shaken down yesterday. "Well? Where's today's payment?" Davis demanded. The vendor trembled. "Sir, I already gave you $100 yesterday." $100. For 2 officers? You kidding me? Miller sneered, glaring at the man. Rachel watched from a distance, her hand trembling slightly as she fought to control her anger. She glanced at the tiny camera on her chest, ensuring it was recording everything. Then, something unexpected happened. Rachel approached, her steps calm and deliberate. "Sir, leave him alone," she said flatly. Davis looked at her, annoyed. "Oh, it's you again. The binner. Playing tough, huh? You want to resist arrest," he said, shoving Rachel's shoulder. Her cart wobbled, spilling bottles across the pavement. A few people gasped, but no one moved to help. Rachel locked eyes with Davis. "I told you. Leave them alone," she said again, her voice now cold and completely different. Miller laughed. "Or what? You going to report us to the Prime Minister?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, her hand slowly reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out something that made both officers' faces turn pale. A small, licensed semi-automatic pistol, aimed directly at Davis. The vendors and shoppers froze. The usually chaotic market fell deathly silent. Davis stared, his face ashen. Who the hell are you?" he stammered. Rachel stared back, her gaze unwavering. "My name is Officer Rachel Price. Internal Affairs. And you two are officially under arrest for extortion and abuse of authority." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people let out quiet, spontaneous cheers, others covered their mouths in disbelief. Davis tried to back away, but from the end of the aisle, 4 plainclothes IA officers appeared, quickly surrounding the scene. Constable Miller made a break for it, but Rachel kicked her shopping cart, sending it crashing into his legs. He fell hard, and in seconds, his hands were cuffed behind his back. Davis's face was beet red. "Damn it. You were undercover this whole time." Rachel looked at him coldly. "That's right. And every shakedown, every threat, is on video." She lowered her weapon slowly, nodding to her team to take the 2 constables to the van. The nest. After the arrest of the 2 officers, the atmosphere at the Kennedy Market changed dramatically. People who were once afraid now started talking. Several vendors cried with relief as they watched Davis and Miller being led away in handcuffs. Rachel stood in the crowd, still in her worn-out jacket. Her face showed no victory, just a deep exhaustion. She knew her job wasn't over. This was just the tip of the iceberg. As the IA van drove away, vendors began to approach her. "Miss Officer Rachel. Thank you so much. We really thought you were just," said an older woman, Maria, who sold baked goods, smiling shyly. Rachel just nodded. "I was just doing my job, ma'am. Please don't tell anyone about this. I still have work to do." The woman nodded, then gave Rachel a quick, maternal hug. "Be careful, kid. Cops like that. They have friends. They don't like people who fight back." Rachel gave a thin smile and walked away. But the woman's words echoed in her head, "They don't like people who fight back." That night, in a temporary IA safe house, the mood was tense. Commander A, a man in his 50s with a hard-lined face and experienced eyes, stared at a laptop playing the footage from Rachel's body cam. "Good work, Price," he said flatly. "But this just got complicated. We've got intel that Davis and Miller aren't small-time. There's a big name behind them." Rachel looked serious. "Whose name, Commander?" "We can't be sure. But the financials from their precinct show a steady flow of funds into several accounts, including one belonging to Superintendent Sullivan." Rachel frowned. She knew the name. Superintendent Sullivan, a high-ranking official at Toronto Police Headquarters, known for his clean public image. But among intel circles, there had long been whispers that he ran his own network, controlling protection rackets in the city's smaller economic sectors. "If this is true," Commander A continued, "then you just poked the bear. And they're definitely going to be looking for you." Rachel was quiet for a moment. She'd known the risks. But hearing a name that powerful changed the game. "What's our next move, Commander?" "You're being pulled. You need to lie low. We'll take over the advanced investigation." Rachel looked at him, disagreeing. "With respect, sir, I can't stop now. I'm too deep on the ground." "That's an order, Price," the commander cut her off, his voice firm. "We don't want you becoming a target. Do you understand?" Rachel finally nodded slowly. But deep down, she knew she wasn't going to stay quiet. The Hunted. 2 days later, Rachel was back in her small basement apartment in Scarborough. She tried to go about her day normally, but since dawn, she'd felt something was off. Twice, she saw a black, unmarked sedan with no plates parked down the street. That night, she heard footsteps in the laneway behind her building. Rachel killed the lights, moved to the window, and peeked through a crack in the curtains. 2 men in plain clothes were standing across the street by a vacant house, talking quietly and smoking. From their posture, they weren't locals. Rachel took a deep breath, retrieved her service pistol from a drawer, and tucked it into the waistband of her jeans. She knew it wasn't paranoia. She was being hunted. At exactly 11 p.m., as she was about to turn off her phone, a text came through from an unknown number. "You think you can play clean in a dirty house? We know who you are, little IA officer." The message made her blood run cold. Less than a minute later, she heard the sound of glass shattering from the back of the apartment. She immediately rolled onto the floor, assuming a defensive position. 2 shadows vaulted the back fence and landed in her small yard. "Find her. Don't let her escape," a man's voice ordered. Rachel crept near the back door, waiting for the footsteps to get closer. As one of the men passed the kitchen entrance, she struck him across the neck with the butt of her pistol. He dropped without a sound. The second man heard the scuffle and fired twice toward the kitchen. Bullets ripped through the thin drywall, sending plaster dust into the air. Rachel scrambled toward the front room, dove through the front window, and sprinted into the dark laneway. Her team's civilian patrol car was supposed to be on standby a few blocks away, but she couldn't contact them. Her phone was left on the kitchen table. She ran silently between the narrow alleys, finally stopping at a small community center. Mr. Petrov, an elderly janitor who recognized her from her bottle-collecting days, opened the side door. Rachel? Why are you running so late? Rachel only whispered, Please, Mr. Petrov, turn off all the lights. Don't come out. There are men looking for me. The old man nodded, no questions asked. Rachel hid in the cold washroom at the back, holding her breath. Outside, she heard a car stop. Check the community center. I bet she ran in here. Rachel gripped her pistol tightly. She knew if they found her, this could be the end. But then, from a distance, she heard a faint siren from the main road. The men outside panicked. Crap, back up. Let's move, now. Their footsteps faded. Rachel only dared to come out a few minutes later. Mr. Petrov looked at her, worried. Kid, who are you, really? Rachel gave him a weary smile. Just someone looking for justice, sir. The chain. The next morning, Rachel contacted Commander A from a computer at a public library. Commander, they know who I am. They found me. Are you safe? For now. But we have to move fast. If Sullivan is really behind this, I can get you more proof. Don't be reckless, Price. We're assembling a special team. Wait for orders. But Rachel couldn't wait. She had already obtained the audio recordings from Constable Davis's seized phone. As she reviewed them, one voice message stood out, the voice chillingly familiar. Don't worry. Just send the usual payments to the regular account. I'll handle the small-time vendors. Just don't let it leak to the media. Rachel played it again and again. She knew that voice. It was Superintendent Sullivan. With that proof, she decided to act alone. She knew Commander A would be furious, but time was not on her side. The final move. That night, Rachel went undercover again. This time, not as a bottle collector, but as a night shift cleaner at the Toronto Police Headquarters on College Street. She'd gained access credentials from an inside source, an officer she'd once helped out on a case. She walked the long, empty hallways of the headquarters. CCTV cameras whirred in the corners, but she already knew their blind spots. She slipped into the internal finance office, picked a lock on a filing cabinet, and found several transfer ledgers. The names of the recipients made her chest tighten. It wasn't just Sullivan. Several other high-ranking officers were receiving funds from the market security racket. As she was photographing the documents with a small camera, the office lights flicked on. I had a feeling you'd be this reckless, Price. A large figure stood in the doorway. Superintendent Sullivan, in full uniform, his service pistol on his hip. His eyes were cold, his lips forming a thin smile. Ambitious young cops like you always forget one thing, he said quietly, stepping closer. In this institution, the truth belongs to those in power. And you're just a pawn. Rachel didn't flinch. She met his gaze. If a pawn can take down a king, I'm willing to be sacrificed, sir. Sullivan laughed, a short, sharp sound. You've got nerve. He slowly raised his pistol, aiming it at her chest. But before he could pull the trigger, the main doors burst open. Drop your weapon, Superintendent. Commander A entered, flanked by several heavily armed IA tactical officers. They had been monitoring Rachel's movements since the afternoon. Apparently, she had managed to trigger a silent distress signal from a device hidden in her watch. Sullivan was stunned. He tried to resist, but a warning shot into the ceiling made him surrender. Price, you're insane. But you're brilliant, Commander A said, clapping her on the shoulder. The blowback. At dawn, Scarborough was still covered in a thin mist. The damp air clung to the asphalt and the shingles of the suburban houses. In a secure IA-safe house in Pickering, Rachel sat alone on a small patio, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her eyes were red, she hadn't slept all night. The arrest of Superintendent Sullivan should have been the end. In reality, it was just the beginning of a much larger storm. In the last 2 days, the media had started reporting on the corrupt cops at the market, arrested thanks to an undercover female officer. But strangely, Rachel's name was never mentioned. Commander A had ordered her to stay off the radar for her own safety. But that morning, when she turned on the small TV in the living room, she heard a CP24 news report that made her blood boil. According to a police spokesperson, the incident at headquarters last night was related to an internal administrative dispute. There is currently no hard evidence of high-level misconduct. Rachel threw the remote at the wall. Administrative dispute. They're insane. They're going to whitewash the whole thing. She paced the small room. All the evidence was there, the recordings, the documents, the money transfers. But as always, as soon as a case touched someone powerful, it started to get buried. A few hours later, Commander A arrived. He looked older than his years, with dark circles under his eyes. "Price, you need to stay calm. The ethics board is demanding we hold back the additional evidence from the public." "Hold back, Commander? That means they're covering it up." "I know. But if you go rogue, they'll turn this on you. They'll say you went outside the chain of command, maybe even fabricated evidence." Rachel looked at him, bitter. "So we just let them clean up their own mess." The commander sighed heavily. "Sometimes, to clear the mud, you have to wait for the water to settle." But Rachel wasn't going to wait. She knew every hour that passed meant evidence could be destroyed and witnesses silenced. The leak. That night, Rachel opened her laptop. She still had copies of all the data on a backup flash drive. She knew the only way to make the truth stick was to leak it to the public. But not just anywhere. She contacted someone through an encrypted chat. "Rachel, I have data on high-level TPS corruption. It needs to be broadcast with visual proof." User: "Who is this?" "Rachel, call me a witness." The person was Adam, a young, independent journalist known for breaking big, risky stories. Rachel had been vetting him for weeks. He wasn't a corporate journalist, he was an idealist, and he was stubborn. They agreed to meet the next night at an old, all-night diner near the bus terminal. The rain was pouring down when Rachel arrived, wearing a black hoodie and a baseball cap. The diner was nearly empty. Adam was already in a corner booth, laptop and a small camera ready. Rachel sat down without ceremony and placed the flash drive on the table. "It's all in there. Bank transfers, audio recordings, and the video of the arrest." Adam looked at her intently. "If this is real, you understand the risk you're taking, right?" "I know. But if the truth is just kept in a file, it's the same as a lie." Adam opened the first file. His expression changed instantly. He saw the video of Sullivan and heard the clear audio recording. He closed the laptop slowly. "I promise this will get out. But we have to be careful. They're definitely monitoring you." Rachel nodded. "I've been ready from the start." But unknown to them, from a dark car across the street, 2 men in plain clothes were watching the diner. One of them spoke into a small radio. "Target has made contact. Awaiting orders." The chase. As soon as the meeting was over, Rachel and Adam split up. But she had only walked a few meters when she heard a car engine revving, coming up fast behind her. Headlights flooded her back. "Stop!" a voice yelled from the car. Rachel immediately bolted into a narrow laneway. A shot was fired into the air, making the few people on the street scream and slam their doors. Rachel ducked, hopped a low fence, and disappeared into a dense residential area. She hid behind a wet brick wall, her breath ragged. The rain was coming down harder. From the end of the alley, two men ran toward her, pistols raised. These weren't thugs, their movements were too trained. One of them yelled, "Sullivan's in jail because of you. Now it's your turn to disappear." Rachel decided to draw them out. She kicked a metal garbage can, making a loud clatter, then moved to the other side of the alley. As one of the men cautiously approached the sound, she dropped down from a low garage roof, kicking him hard in the shoulder. He went down, his gun skittering away. The other man fired twice, but the bullets went wide. Rachel sprinted through the muddy alley, hot-wired an old motorcycle parked outside a closed variety store, and sped off toward the highway. The black sedan was right behind her, weaving through traffic, horns blaring. The city lights reflected off the slick pavement, making the chase feel surreal. But Rachel had a plan. Under a 401 overpass, Adam was waiting in his car. She skidded the bike to a halt, jumped into his passenger seat, and they sped off toward the edge of the city. The truth. A few hours later, in the empty house in Pickering, Adam stared intently at his laptop. He was uploading the video and documents to a network of national media servers. "If this signal holds, in 5 minutes, this will be on every news portal in the country," he said. Rachel sat on the floor, watching the progress bar. "As soon as this is out, they'll hunt us down." Adam managed a thin smile. "Yeah. But if everyone knows, they can't silence it." At 3:17 a.m., the upload finished. A video titled "Internal Corruption," the voice inside the uniform went live. Within minutes, it was viral. The hashtags "Clean the Force" and "Speak the Truth" were trending nationally. But shortly after, the power in the house cut out. Adam looked toward the window. "I think they know where we are." Rachel took a deep breath. "We have to split up. You take the backup drive to another media outlet. I'll draw them away." "Are you crazy? That's suicide. If we both get caught, no one is left to continue this. Trust me, Adam." Adam hesitated, then nodded grimly. "Okay. But promise me one thing. You get out of this alive." Rachel smiled faintly. "I'll try." Flight to dawn. Rachel slipped out of the house, moving quickly through the shadows of the trees. Black vehicles were already lining up at the end of the street, their red and blue lights flashing silently. She knew this wasn't an official IA operation. This was a shadow operation, run by those still loyal to Sullivan. Without a second thought, she ran toward the small ravine at the back of the subdivision. Her footsteps were muffled by the wet earth. In the distance, she could hear tactical dogs barking. Rachel kept running until she reached the small, cold Rouge River. She scrambled down the muddy bank and waded into the icy water, hiding behind the massive roots of a fallen tree. Holding her breath, she watched as flashlight beams danced across the water's surface. One of the men shouted, "She can't have gone far. Find her." But as they fanned out, Rachel slowly submerged, swam to the other side, and disappeared into the darkness. The new morning. The sun was just rising when Rachel emerged onto a small side road. Her clothes were soaked, her hair matted, but her eyes were still sharp. She saw a newspaper box at a gas station. The front page headline, "Massive Scandal Rocks Toronto Police. Undercover Officers' Data Leaks, Implicates Top Brass." She breathed a sigh of relief. The truth was out. But beneath the main headline, a smaller article in the corner, "Identity of Female Officer Remains a Mystery. Police Officials Announce a Task Force to Find and Protect Her." Rachel smiled grimly. She knew protect didn't always mean safe. But for the first time, she felt her fight hadn't been in vain. She looked toward the sun, just clearing the distant city skyline. They might have the uniform, she muttered, but the people have eyes. 3 days after the news bomb dropped, the city was in an uproar. On TV, in coffee shops, and on social media, everyone was talking about the mysterious female officer who dared to expose the rot within the police force. But behind the public noise, Rachel lived in the shadows. She moved from place to place, sometimes sleeping in vacant houses, sometimes in the back of a 24-hour chapel. Her hair was now cut short, making her harder to recognize. In her hand, she always carried one thing, the original flash drive with all the evidence. That night, she was hiding in the spare room of Maria, the elderly vendor from the market. "Rachel, you have to eat. Not just coffee." "You look pale, child," Maria said, bringing her a plate of food. Rachel smiled weakly. "Thank you, Maria. I'm okay." "This city is strange, you know," Maria muttered, looking at her with pity. "The bad people get protected, and the good people get hunted." Rachel was silent. She knew the old woman was right. The tribunal. Back in Toronto, Commander A was facing an internal ethics tribunal. He stood before the high-ranking board examining his team's actions. "You authorized an officer to conduct an operation without a written warrant, causing irreparable damage to this institution's reputation," one of the officials said coldly. Commander A replied calmly, "What's damaged isn't the institution's reputation, sir, but the integrity of the men who run it. If this institution is afraid of the truth, we've already lost." The room went silent. They couldn't directly punish him, public support for Rachel and her team was too strong. But the political pressure was immense. Meanwhile, outside police headquarters, hundreds of university students were protesting. They carried signs reading, "Clean the force, protect Rachel," and "Truth can't be silenced." But on the other side, some were furious. Several high-ranking officers, threatened by the investigation, now saw Rachel as a traitor in their ranks. A bullet at dusk. That evening, Rachel was walking alone along the edge of a field, trying to get a signal to contact Commander A. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. The orange sky reflected off the puddles. Suddenly, she heard the sound of motorcycles. 2 bikes, driving slowly toward her. Rachel's instincts flared. She lowered her phone, watching them. "All alone, little IA officer," one of them called out mockingly. Rachel took a step back. "Who are you?" "Just the cleanup crew. Finishing the job." Before she could react, the first shot was fired. Rachel dove into a shallow ditch by the side of the road. The bullet missed, slamming into a fence post. She pulled her own weapon from her bag, firing twice in return. One of the attackers fell, the bike skidding out. The other one sped off toward the main road. Rachel ran to the downed attacker, checking his identity. Tucked inside his jacket, she found a small, off-duty police badge. Rachel froze. They weren't thugs. They were cops. The last call. That night, Rachel managed to contact Commander A through a secure line. "Commander, I was just attacked. I found a badge. They're our own people." The voice on the other end was heavy. "I know, Price. There's a faction loyal to Sullivan. They're looking for revenge. So what's our next move?" "I've sent the complete file to the Justice Minister, but the situation is sensitive. You have to stay hidden until you get an official summons." Rachel was quiet for a long time. "I'm tired, Commander. Tired of hiding, tired of being hunted by the same people I'm supposed to be working with." The commander's voice softened. "I know, kid. But you've done something monumental. Believe me, this sacrifice won't be for nothing." Before hanging up, he said one last thing that made Rachel's chest ache. "If one day you can't wear that uniform anymore, just remember, the truth doesn't need a badge." A different kind of end. 3 days later, a shocking report hit the news. Superintendent Sullivan had been found dead in his holding cell, the cause cited as a sudden heart attack. Rachel stared at the screen, her face blank. She knew what that meant. The case would be quietly closed. She knew Sullivan hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been silenced to stop him from talking. But at the same time, the media announced other news. The provincial government was officially forming a police reform task force, inspired by the courage of a female officer who refused to back down from injustice. Rachel couldn't hold back her tears this time. She cried, not from sadness, but from the realization that her fight had mattered. Epilogue: The market. Several months later, the Kennedy Road Market was different. There were no arrogant cops, no fearful vendors. Things were calm, as they should be. Among the crowd, a young woman with short hair and simple clothes walked by, carrying a shopping bag. She smiled at the vendors, who looked at her puzzled. "Hey, Rachel?" Maria, the baker, called out. Rachel turned and smiled faintly. "Hi, Maria. Long time no see." "Thank God. Ever since you exposed that whole mess, this market is peaceful." "No more shakedowns," the woman said, her voice full of emotion. Rachel just nodded, bought a pastry, and walked away. She no longer wore a uniform, no longer carried a gun. But her eyes still held the same unwavering resolve. That evening, Rachel sat by the edge of the Rouge River, the same one that had been her escape. The evening breeze was gentle. She wrote something in a small notebook she always carried. Justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about choosing to stand in the right place, even when everyone else tells you to move. From a distance, she could hear children playing. The sky slowly turned orange as the sun set behind the horizon. Rachel closed her book, looked at the sky, and smiled. She might no longer be part of the institution she once served. But in her heart, she knew she was still honoring her oath, to uphold the truth, no matter the cost. A few months later, Rachel's case file was being used as a training simulation at the Ontario Police College. No one knew where she was, but many believed she was still out there, working for the country. Not with a uniform, but with a conscience. And in a corner of the Kennedy Road Market, on a concrete wall near where the garbage was collected,